Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 34th high-level meeting that is organized by the Nizami Ganjavi International Center. I am Ismail Saragildeen, and I'm honored to be the co-chair of the Board of Trustees of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center. Our meetings in the coming 2 days will be under the general heading of Multilateralism at a Crossroads, Challenges and Pathways to Peace, a very timely topic as the UN reaches its 80th anniversary. And now to start our opening ceremony, it is my great pleasure and honor to call on Her Excellency Vaira Vike Freiberga, President of Latvia and co-chair of the NGIC, to start out with her opening speech.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. May I, on behalf of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, extend a especially warm welcome to those among us who are at the current moment sitting heads of state or government, because we know how heavy the responsibilities of states can be, and certainly how full the timetables and calendars of persons in office. But we're equally grateful for the presence of former prime ministers and presidents from many countries, and indeed from representatives from over 50 countries across the world, including Chile. Yesterday I was so pleased to hear that we have also people from Chile. The 34th meeting of the NGIC as a side event to the General Assembly of the United Nations takes place at a parlous time when there are many conflicts in the world and where multilateralism certainly is at the crossroads. We are here in a way celebrating the 80th anniversary of the birth of the United Nations, an organization that was founded after the Second World War with a devout hope that it would help to maintain peace and security in the world and prevent certainly the kind of conflict of the Second World being a horrible bloodbath in every possible way. You might think that the 80th anniversary would deserve great joy and jubilation, but from what we have seen from the General Assembly so far, the United Nations has also been the object of severe criticism, and its very existence and usefulness to the world has been questioned. Certainly, it has not been able to deliver peace and security, not in Ukraine, not in Gaza, not in other places in the world where conflicts keep recurring, but these two particularly current ones, Gaza and Ukraine, are painful, I think, in the extreme. The desire to have a body where nations would come together in the General Assembly, where every country has a seat and every country has its flag on a flagpole, is a testament to the desire to consider every nation equally valuable within its sovereign borders and following its constitution. It is an argument against the so-called concept of spheres of influence, where some big and powerful countries take all the decisions and others are mere puppets or objects who have to passively accept their decisions instead of contributing their own viewpoint and defending their own interests. Because, of course, one may say that my nation, right or wrong, is the best in the world, and in our heart of hearts, of course, we would like to think that our nation, at least in some ways, is the best in the world, in some sense or some accomplishment. But to deny the same right of existence, to deny the right to your language, to deny the right of your borders, to invade, as the Russian Federation has done with Ukraine, to simply invade, attack, and destroy, and continue attacking, and mostly attacking civilians, more even in a way than at the front, where soldiers are fighting. These are situations that are a failure, of course, of multilateralism. And I would like to single out two factors, I guess, that contribute to it. The very structure of the United Nations, when we hear complaints about their inefficiency, lies in the way it was created. The General Assembly is really the fundamental principle. Every nation has a vote, has a voice, has a place. That's absolutely crucial, and the General Assembly, therefore, should remain a crucial and important body within the United Nations structures. But the presence of the Security Council is obviously a structural default, if you like, and especially for the 5 permanent members and the right of veto. The fact that the Security Council now includes also rotating representatives from different countries without the right of veto, but with the right to participate in debates, is a crucial improvement. And Latvia, having just joined the Security Council this year, of course, will do its best, as do other small countries, to present their point of view and to defend it. But what we see in the world are ideas that go against the principles that the United Nations and its Declaration of Human Rights had formulated and presented to the world. And in that sense, it behooves those who are still in office now and can take decisions, and those who are working in the United Nations bodies. And by the way, a special welcome to heads and representatives of various United Nations bodies, because despite the withdrawal of funds, despite the criticisms from powerful and rich countries, they do have a crucial job to accomplish, in a way, to execute the will of the General Assembly in terms of addressing certain problems and challenges that have been acknowledged by most countries in the world, but not all, to be able to be the executive branch, if you like, in putting these things in reality and presenting them to the citizens who need it the most. I'm talking about citizens of the world in the broadest sense. The ideas, the concepts that go against, and that the United Nations principles, and that are the ones that are causing, to my understanding, the failures that we see in the functioning of international collaboration and multilateralism, are ideas such as imperialism, that some nations, because of their strength and their power, of their size, automatically have a right to continue expanding like greedy amoebas who swallow up their neighbors and deny the existence of others, such as happened in Ukraine with its invasion. It's also the case with the Palestinians, who, after all, are a nation who do not have a home and do not have their own place to put up their tent. The other aspect is the idea that we have divine rights of kings in different forms that are taken on in theocracies, extremist theocracies, or theocracies in the making, And I would invite all our members and guests to reread two classics that, to my mind, embody what is wrong, which can go terribly wrong with the world. One is George Orwell's 1984. It's way past the due date, but it's still absolutely applicable and pertinent. And the other one is a book by Canadian author Margaret Atwood, and it's called The Handmaid's Tale. And the invoking of divine protection, Christianity, and if you like, implying that you have a special mandate from God, or you have a special telephone line with the divine, is the other danger. And theocracy, misogynistic theocracy, is what you will see in Margaret Atwood's dystopia, which is in many ways too close to what is happening in many parts of the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again, and I hope we'll have very exciting and interesting discussions.
Thank you, President Vieira. And I'm told we have a small video that we would like to show to the audience. Can you run the video now, please?
The city that never sleeps becomes the stage for global dialogue. Skyscrapers rise, lights flicker, streets hum with ambition. Each September, the United Nations gathers.
The 80th session of the General Assembly.
The world holds its breath. And alongside, the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, a nexus of diverse political thought, hosts its 34th high-level meeting, the largest side event to the UN General Assembly.
We're gathered once again at an important event taking place in the city of New York, to which we bring our own contribution, our voice, and our ideas.
Global leaders, former heads of state, and visionaries gather. And it is here that the spirit of multilateralism takes shape.
The experience of members of Nizami Ganjavi International Center and participants, their knowledge, their experience as heads of states, governments, and foreign ministers really is something which the world needs today in order to address issues of global importance.
Inside the historic walls of the Harvard Club, voices converge, ideas ignite, bridges are built, where divisions once seemed permanent.
And I do want to talk about how we can all come together to put forward the proposals that are necessary for an effective multilateralism for the future.
A very fundamental principle of multilateralism. In order to succeed, we have to work together.
The urgent questions of our time: climate, inequality, technology, health.
Health is one of the few areas in which nations can work together across ideological divides to find common solutions.
Helping countries to prevent a crisis is better than responding to it.
Inequalities and the climate crisis are political choices. Climate change is human-made, so solutions have to be human-made.
We have to save the planet, and I think that should be our main concern in today's world.
These challenges demand courage, wisdom, and cooperation.
The only way we can hope to have peace back is by working together to bring peace to our part of the world.
Together, the path to peace begins.
The superfluity of good advice has to reach out on the ground to concrete actions, to concrete decisions.
May I say a huge thank you to the NGIC for providing that space and to discuss issues. And I think that is so important in today's world.
Welcome to the NGIC's 34th high-level meeting, Multilateralism on a Crossroads, Challenges and Pathways to Peace.
Thank you. It is now my great honor and privilege to call on His Excellency Bajram Bagaz, President of the Republic of Albania. The floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. It's an honor to address this high-level meeting, which comes at a moment when our collective reflection carries such weight for the future of peace, stability, and cooperation. We meet not only to discuss ideas, but also to reaffirm the very principles that hold the international community together. The world today is showing alarming signs of drifting away from multilateralism. We see wars and conflicts erupting where dialogue should prevail. We see the language of power replacing the language of cooperation. The war in Ukraine has shaken the foundation of security in Europe. The violence in the Middle East continues to take innocent lives and deepen despair. Elsewhere, tensions and rivalries are multiplying, creating fractures in the global order. These developments are not random. They reflect, in part, the failure of international institutions to prevent aggression, to mediate effectively, and to address the grievances of nations before they escalate to violence. They also reflect the failure of all modern stakeholders, states primarily, for choosing division over solidarity, competition over cooperation, and exclusion over inclusion. And yet, let us not forget how much good has come from multilateralism. The creation of the United Nations gave humanity a forum for dialogue, where previously there had been only confrontation. It has established the rules and norms that have prevented the recurrence of world wars. International institutions have been supporting decolonization, advanced human rights, promoted global health, and fostered unprecedented cooperation in science, trade, and development. Multilateralism has allowed states large and small, rich and poor, to sit at the same table. It has created the framework for peacekeeping, for humanitarian aid, and for collective response to global challenges such as climate change and pandemics. Without multilateralism, our world would be more fractured, more unstable, and less just. Precisely because we are at a crossroads, the answer cannot be to abandon multilateralism. On the contrary, this is the moment to embrace it, to strengthen it, and to renew our commitment to international institutions. Wars and geopolitical tensions that we witness today are evidence not of the futility of multilateralism, but of the cost we pay when it is weakened or sidelined. For small countries like Albania, multilateralism is the foundation of our security and the guarantee of our voice in world affairs. Without strong and inclusive institutions, small nations risk being drawn out by the logic of might over right. It is through the United Nations and other multilateral bodies that we can contribute to decisions, defend our sovereignty, and advocate for peace. Of course, we are aware of the deficiencies of our current system. International institutions are sometimes slow, sometimes ineffective, and sometimes unrepresentative. But we should not throw the baby out without the bathwater. The answer is not abandonment, but reform and renewal, not abandonment and rejection. We need institutions that are more inclusive, more accountable, and more capable of responding swiftly to crisis. We need multilateralism that is not paralyzed by division, but energized by the common good. The task is not easy, but the alternative of the return to spheres of influence, to unilateralism, and to zero-sum rivalries is far worse. Where there is a will, there is a way, and we should use every opportunity for peace. In this context, allow me to extend a special word of gratitude to President Ilham Aliyev for the historic peace achieved with Armenia. This shows that even the deepest conflicts can be resolved through dialogue, diplomacy, and perseverance with the support of partners like the United States who believe in a reconciliation and lasting peace. I want to express my deep appreciation to NGIC, which has become a valuable partner for dialogue, understanding, and the exchange of ideas among leaders, thinkers, and nations. By bringing us together, it gives multilateralism new life and new meaning. Multilateralism is at the crossroads, but so too is humanity. The choice before us is whether we allow the world to slide deeper into conflict and fragmentation, or whether we work together to build a more just and peaceful order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now it's my great pleasure and honor to invite His Excellency Zeljko Komačić, Chairman of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The floor is yours.
Distinguished guests, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to address this gathering here at the Harvard Club among distinguished leaders dedicated to peace and cooperation. Today, as we reflect on the multilateralism, we draw inspiration from Nizami's timeless wisdom, a legacy rooted in dialogue, compassion, and justice. In a world characterized by complexity, multilateralism stands at a critical juncture. We face challenges that no single nation can solve alone. Recurrence of genocide and conflicts that fragment societies, economic disparities that fuel instability and crisis of democracy. These challenges test the very foundation of international cooperation and demand renewed commitment to collective action. Bosnia and Herzegovina knows all too well the cost of division and the value of dialogue. Our history teaching us to advocate for dialogue in the world of multilateralism, not as an abstract idea, but as a practical necessity, a framework through which peace, security, and sustainable development can be achieved. Our generation has entered a dark era of shattered values of humanism. It is almost unthinkable that genocide and deliberate starvation of entire people have become part of our daily reality, a normality we risk passing on the future generation. The very least we can do is teach those generations the values of empathy and solidarity with those who suffer. Without that foundation, they cannot take the first step toward improving the world we are leaving behind. As we gather here in New York, a city symbolic of diplomacy and diversity, let us to reaffirm our commitment to multilateral idea that Nizami Ganjavi so eloquently expressed. As Nizami reminds us, when the world is in harmony, the music of life is sweet. We should heed the power of this virtue to address today's challenges and build a future where peace is not fleeting hope, but a lasting reality. At last, I call upon leaders, my fellow colleagues, to stand united in this crossroads. Together, through dialogue, respect, and determination, we can chart a course toward a world defined by less chaos and more stability and justice. Thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now it's my great honor to call on Excellency Jakov Milatovic, President of Montenegro.
Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me first at the beginning greet you all. I see many familiar faces. Let me also especially greet my colleagues from Montenegro, the former Prime Minister of Montenegro and the former Defense Minister from Montenegro. It is really a great honor to address you today at the 34th Nizami Conference here in New York. This forum offers an important opportunity to reflect on the challenges before us and to reaffirm the values of cooperation and the values of dialogue. This year, as we mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, we celebrate a vision that has guided the world through decades of profound change. The vision of nations united in the pursuit of peace, justice, and human dignity. It is a vision born from the ruins of war, a vision born from cities in ashes, a vision born from sorrow and tears, but still raised by the faith that humanity can rise above fear. Our task, 8 years later, is not only to keep that flame alive, but to make it even more powerful and more effective to face all the challenges that the world is facing today. The United Nations has delivered so far some major results, even remarkable results. It helped to prevent major wars, to advance human rights throughout the world, to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But with these successes, expectations have also grown. And today, indeed, multilateralism stands at the crossroads. The challenges are very clear. Trust in institutions is weakening. Unilateral approaches are on the rise throughout the world. Inequalities are deepening. And new threats, including cyber and hybrid threats, terrorism, and disinformation, cut across borders and defy unilateral solutions. Dear colleagues, misinformation spreads faster than truth, thus eroding trust and fueling divisions. And climate change is not just a warning from the scientists. It is flooding our land and our homes. It is burning crops and leaving millions without food, healthcare, and a better future. And at the same time, the global order is increasingly shaped by non-state actors, those in technology, in finance, in media, whose influence rivals that of the governments and of states. And these dynamics make cooperation more complex. But dear colleagues, they also make our cooperation more necessary than ever before. So there is no doubt, if multilateralism fails, no nation will stand secure. If it succeeds, all nations will benefit and share the benefits. The pathways to peace are equally clear. We must rebuild trust in international institutions, strengthen respect for the international law, and ensure that our frameworks of cooperation are more inclusive and more effective. We must put human security above narrow interests and diplomacy above confrontation. Lasting peace is built not on isolation, but on listening, understanding, and on compromise. We do not need more divisions. We need more dialogue. And let me quote here probably the most famous writer from our region, a Nobel laureate, Ivo Andrić, who wrote in his masterpiece, The Bridge on the River Drina, of everything that man erects and builds in his urge for living, nothing is, in my eyes, better and more valuable than bridges. They're more important than houses, more sacred than temples, for they belong to all and are equal for everyone. This timeless truth reminds us that bridges are not only structures of stone, but structures of peace and dialogue. And it is a dialogue that builds bridges. And it is only through bridges that nations can walk towards peace. For my country, for Montenegro, these pathways are not theoretical. They are our daily reality. As a small state, our security and prosperity depend on dialogue, on rules, on institutions. That is why multilateralism is the cornerstone of our foreign policy, aligned with our European and Euro-Atlantic paths, and rooted deeply in our good neighborly relations and commitment to our regional cooperation. That is why Montenegro is committed to multilateralism. It guarantees that even the smallest voice, like the one of Montenegro, can be heard in shaping the future of our great world. And that is why we strongly support the UN 80 initiative launched by the Secretary General of the United Nations. We believe it can transform this great organization to effectively meet the needs of today and, even more importantly, the needs of tomorrow. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, the world is in search of a new equilibrium. We stand at a turning point. We can retreat into divisions, or we can move forward together. And this is why I'm also here today with all of you, to once again say that history teaches us that when nations cooperate, humanity prospers. But when nations turn inward, everyone loses. As President of Montenegro, I assure you that my country will continue to stand firmly on the side of the dialogue, cooperation, and international law. Our voice may be the one of a small country, but it is consistent and clear. Peace can only be secured together. Every nation, every voice, every effort matters. To conclude, let us therefore mark this 80th anniversary not only by recalling our past achievements, but by renewing our common purpose. It is the purpose which is the most important. And the purpose is to leave to future generations a world which is safer, fairer, and more humane than the one we inherited. Our task is not to be passive heirs of history, but active builders of a better legacy. So let the next 80 years of the United Nations be not years of hesitation, but of courage and solidarity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now it is my great privilege to call His Excellency Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization. The floor is yours, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Moderator. Your Excellency, Chair of NGIC, former President Vaira Vik-Freiberga, Excellencies, Presidents, Prime Ministers, sitting and former, and my good friend Secretary General Rovshan Muradov, Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends. I thank the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for bringing us together once again. At the beginning of the general debate yesterday, the President of the 80th session of the General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, asked us to consider what the world would be like without the United Nations. Neither WHO nor the UN to which we belong are perfect. But there is no alternative, and without these institutions, the world would be a far more dangerous, unequal, and fragmented place. Consider what would be missing without the World Health Organization. In a world in which viruses don't respect borders, who would monitor outbreaks and coordinate the global, the global response? During the COVID-19 pandemic, the vaccine inequity that the world witnessed would have been much worse without the COVAX partnership of which WHO was part. Sorry. Millions more lives would have been lost, not just to the virus, but to chaos and inequality. In addition, smallpox would still be with us. Polio would still be paralyzing hundreds of thousands of children every year. Millions of children would have lost their lives to vaccine-preventable diseases. And beyond emergencies, who would speak for the billions who live without access to essential health services? Who would track air pollution or make the case that climate action is also a health imperative? Of course, WHO does not do any of this work alone. In every area, we work with a wide range of partners. But it's hard to imagine a world without WHO playing its leading convening, and coordinating role in the global health architecture. None of this work happens by accident. It happens because the world, through the WHO and the United Nations, has chosen cooperation over isolation. Yes, we face criticism, some of it fair, some of it not. Bureaucracy, inefficiency, lack of agility, these are real challenges. But the solution is not to undermine or weaken multilateralism. It is to strengthen it. We must strengthen the institutions that hold the global system together, not abandon them at the moment we need them most. For WHO, reform is constant. When I became Director General more than 8 years ago, we designed and delivered the most significant set of reforms in the organization's history. That includes reforms to WHO's financing that have helped to mitigate the impact of the funding cuts we have faced this year. Multilateralism is not a luxury. It is a necessity. WHO and the UN were formed in the aftermath of the Second World War in the recognition that the only alternative to global conflict was global cooperation. The Constitution of the WHO became the first instrument of international law to affirm that health is a fundamental human right. But it went further, saying that health is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security. That conviction remains as relevant today as it was 77 years ago. In these divided and divisive times, health is one of the few areas in which countries who are otherwise political and economic rivals can work together to build a common approach to common threats. Exhibit A is the pandemic agreement, which WHO member states adopted at the World Health Assembly in May this year. After 3.5 years of negotiation, the nations of the world showed that it's still possible for countries to work together and to find common ground for a common response. The adoption of the pandemic agreement was truly historic. It showed that multilateralism is alive and well. WHO, like the UN, is a platform where every country, large and small, rich and poor, has a voice. It's where we make health not a privilege, but a right. So let's not forget what we have achieved together. Let's not allow frustration to blind us to progress. And let us recommit to the idea that by standing together, we can overcome challenges no nation can face alone. The rule of the game is together, especially in this world which is getting smaller and smaller. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros. Now it is my great privilege to call on Her Excellency Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UNCTAD.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues from the UN family, dear Robson, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It is really an honor to stand before this remarkable gathering of leaders who have shaped and continue to shape our collective journey towards peace and prosperity. Thank you for convening us around this vital moment. Multilateralism is indeed at a crossroad. But let me try to characterize this more as an interregnum. Is these times where the old is dying and the new cannot be born. And so there are forces that go in different directions. We are in an age of contradiction. But this is important because sometimes we read the paper, we wake up in the morning, and we think things only go in one direction. So we have to be reminded that that is not so, that there are contradictions and different forces that are playing in this interregnum, and that we have agency, we have choices. It's not that everything will land in the same, in the same direction. So we have, as it was saying by the president of Albania, retreat but also renewal. We have skepticism but also dynamism. We have fatigue but also creativity. We have opportunities. At the same time, we see unbearable human suffering around. Let me give you two things that are more positive from all what we hear. You know, growth and trade, even in this era of so high uncertainty, are behaving in a very resilient way. We thought at the beginning of the year that we will have very low growth and that we will have negative growth in trade. Well, growth will be around 3% this year. 4% growth coming from the South. Or trade will still grow almost 1% this year, despite tariffs, despite the tectonic shift in trade, despite uncertainty. So in this period of accelerated change, we can go through these contradictions. Let's take AI and the digital economy. The market for frontier technologies is projected to reach $16 trillion by 2033. This isn't just about market size. It's about leapfrogging opportunities for the developing world, about diagnostic tools reaching remote villages, about small farmers accessing global markets through their phones. At the same time, we know that 2.6 billion people are offline, but the two things happen at the same time. Or we know that NVIDIA value in the market is around $4 trillion, more than all the GDP of Africa. Or take energy. While we grapple with climate crisis, renewable capacity grew by 585 gigawatts last year, the largest jump ever. 92% last year, 92% of all new energy capacity that was installed in the world was renewable, 92%. But 660 million people lack access to electricity. Or let's consider geoeconomics, where multipolarity is more evident in trade and in the global economy. For the first time in 3 centuries, South-South trade now equals North-North trade. 3/4 of all growth in the global economy in the next 5 years will come from the South. And it's not only China, because when you say this, everybody looks and say, oh, China. No, it's China, it's Indonesia, it's Turkey, it's Brazil, it's Vietnam. So even in the middle of this trade war, we expect trade itself to continue growing, spearheaded by services and by the developing world. So we have multipolarity in trade and the global economy. We have bipolarity, almost bipolarity, in the frontier economies, especially in AI. We have unipolarity in global finance, especially in reserve currency. Many say that we have unipolarity also in the military. And the president of Montenegro was saying also that we have this multipolarity of state actors that are becoming more and more important and powerful. So all this makes the world we live in very complex. So multilateralism itself is at stake. We see breakdowns, but also breakthroughs. The Security Council may be deadlocked, yet last year we saw success, and this year, in the financing for development in Seville. That was really a coalition between Africa and Europe, and that's why the FFD, the Financing for Development in Seville, was a success. Or we had the Ocean Conference in Nice. We have the BNNJ that came into play here in the General Assembly. We had the pandemic preparedness at WHO, like Tedros says. We saw the resolution of the GA on artificial intelligence. So for the small countries, for the medium-sized countries, our resilience comes from our interdependence. Yesterday that I was in the WEF in a huge discussion with them on the future of the economy, they were asking this question: is self-reliance or interdependence? What is self-reliance for the small and medium-sized countries? Our resilience comes from interdependence. So I am not saying we should pretend that challenges don't exist. They do, they are great, and they are growing. But I'm saying that we exist to overcome them, that we have agency, that we have choices, and that to be a multilateralist today is to be a reformer. And we have to reform our institutions with respect to the way in which we envisaged them in 1945. So 80 years ago, when the UN was created, there was in a way, I say, we have three deficits in the world today. We have the deficit of development, we have the deficit of trust, but we also have the deficit of hope. In 80 years ago, when the UN was created, we had no growth. We had no trust because, we came after, we killed each other. But there was hope. It was hope that allowed us to build that what the then world leaders thought could be a new world, a better world. Today, we have more resources than ever. Global GDP is 20 times what it was in 1945. We have more knowledge, more technology, more capacity to solve problems than at any point in human history. What we lack is not means, but meaning, not capacity, but conviction. So friends, at this crossroads, standing still is not an option. The choice is ours, reform or retreat, cooperation or fragmentation. So let us choose wisely. Let us choose together and do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And now it's my pleasure and honor to call on Her Excellency Doreen Bogdan Martin, Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, friends, good morning. Perhaps some of you are wondering, what does the ITU have to do with multilateralism, with peace? Well, it's simple. Connectivity is peace infrastructure. Peace depends on dialogue, and connectivity enables that dialogue. It's a marketplace of ideas, open 24 hours a day. With artificial intelligence accelerating, that marketplace is expanding faster than ever. Yet, it's so easy to just focus on the road ahead. At UNGA, we're hearing about artificial intelligence, about sixth-generation mobile networks, about space, satellites, all of which are areas that the ITU plays a leading role in. But as Rebecca has just mentioned, we cannot forget that 2.6 billion people among us are not yet connected. If people are offline, we're not just missing them, we're missing their solutions. This is where multilateralism becomes essential, because meaningful connectivity doesn't happen on its own. It requires cooperation to build infrastructure, to set standards, and to help develop policies and regulations that make networks safe and reliable. And that's the work that ITU does each and every day. Many say, as we hear this week, multilateralism is broken, that it cannot deliver. I think in the ITU, we see proof each day that it does work. For 160 years, nations, companies, universities, researchers have come together under ITU's framework to agree on technical rules that keep the world connected. From the radio regulations that prevent harmful interference on Earth and in space, coordination of orbital slots for satellites, to standards that help to strengthen resilience of undersea cables that carry 99% of international data traffic. This is multilateralism at work. ITU's long history teaches us that cooperation may not always have big headlines, but it does deliver results. Looking at the road ahead, we need those lessons more than ever. Through our Connecting Humanity Action Blueprint for Universal Connectivity, connecting everyone by 2030 will require about $2.8 trillion in investment. It's ambitious, but it's achievable. Through our Partner to Connect, we have some 500 partners from 149 countries that have pledged more than $76 billion to meaningful connectivity and digital transformation for all. Through our GIGA efforts with ITU and UNICEF, we've connected over 2.2 million students to real-time learning opportunities. They're not just digital projects, they actually reflect how digital connectivity helps to accelerate every development goal. A connected school is progress on education. A connected clinic is progress on health. A connected market is progress on livelihoods. Excellencies, we must also be clear-eyed about the challenges ahead. Harmful radio interference has increased 5-fold since 2023. Space debris threatens our ability to benefit from the growing space economy. Cyber attacks occur roughly every 39 seconds, making it harder to keep our online environments safer. Misinformation spreads faster than truth, as the president of Montenegro has just mentioned. And data centers powering artificial intelligence could see their energy demand grow by 160% by the end of this decade. Artificial intelligence advancement is outpacing responsibility, heightening the risk of misuse with compute and infrastructure concentrated in the hands of too few. Meeting these challenges depends on our capacity for digital cooperation, and that's why ITU's role in multilateralism is so important. So let me be clear about what I see at this crossroads. We can choose isolation, where each nation tries to solve their connectivity challenges alone, where standards fragment, where trust erodes. Or we can choose cooperation, where we use every partnership, every standard, every shared commitment to prove that multilateralism works. Excellencies, multilateralism is our competitive advantage. It built our communication systems from the telegraph to satellites to networks that connect nations across oceans, to devices that act as early warning devices during climate disasters. Multilateralism may be at a crossroads, but when we look at connectivity from seabed to outer space, we see a path forward. As we connect the unconnected, as we reinforce cooperation with every standard and pledge, we're not only building networks, we're building peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And now it is my great privilege to call on His Excellency Mukhtar Babayev, representative of His Excellency the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Climate Peace, President of COP29 and Minister of Ecology, our Natural Resources of Azerbaijan. Minister Babayev, you have the floor.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear friends. First of all, I must express my deepest gratitude to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for bringing us together. The center has a unique ability to convene leaders, thinkers, and friends from around the world to constructive dialogue. This was on full display last year as you hosted countless events to support the COP29 presidency and drive forward our agenda. Your collaboration was a critical factor in our success. Dear colleagues, COP29 demonstrated that multilateralism is capable of delivering real and historic results. We concluded deals that negotiators have struggled over for nearly a decade. We secured a long overdue breakthrough on UN carbon markets. This will unlock the potential for high-integrity markets that could channel $1 trillion a year into climate solution by 2050. We also got the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage up and running. This fund will support communities who have contributed the least to the crisis but suffer most from its effects. We also saw countries and companies enhance their ambitions with new emission reduction targets, as well as pledges to address critical themes including grids, water, and resilient cities. And in the end, we delivered the historic Baku finance goal. Here, donors pledged to mobilize at least $300 billion a year for developing countries by 2035. This is the largest financial commitment ever made in UN process. Together, these outcomes reinforce the foundations of the multilateral climate system. Together, this COP29 showed the world that cooperation is still possible, that solidarity is still meaningful, and that progress is still within our grasp. However, the true test of multilateralism is not just whether we can come to agreement. It also depends on whether we can deliver on our commitments. To preserve the legitimacy of this process, we must now fulfill past promises. That means meeting the targets we set ourselves on everything from finance to emission reductions and transparency. As donors promised in Baku, finance must flow. Donors must honor their commitments to double adaptation finance, triple the outflows from UN climate funds, and scale up their contributions to mobilize $300 billion a year by 2035. We understand that many governments face difficult trade-offs on the allocate attention and resources. But we cannot afford to go backwards on our finance commitments. Ambition must also rise in the next generation of climate plans, which will guide and attract the investments needed to transform economies. With the conclusion of all the rules for how we will implement the Paris Agreement, the era of designing the system is over. The era of delivery has begun. Success in confronting climate change will not be determined by what we negotiate in conference halls. Instead, it will be set by what each country, community, and company does in practice. Last year, our efforts were guided by the vision of His Excellency Mr. Ilham Aliyev, President of Azerbaijan. Now he has again set the direction for how we will contribute to this new era of climate action. Azerbaijan will ensure that climate change stays at the top of the international agenda. We will work relentlessly to implement the outcomes of COP29, and we will continue to convene the world behind our shared challenges. Next year, we are hosting World Environment Day, and in May, World Urban Forum in Baku. These events will be a vital chance to bring together governments, civil society, international organizations, and businesses to unlock progress on sustainable urbanization. Hosting these events represents our continued commitment to the multilateral system. We look forward to welcoming you all to Baku once more next year. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Babayev. It is now my great privilege to call on His Excellency Wu Hongbo, who is the Special Representative of the Chinese Government on European Affairs, former UN Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, and former Ambassador. Mr. Wu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear moderator. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. 54 years ago, the United Nations adopted resolution number 2758 by an overwhelming majority to restore all legitimate rights to the People's Republic of China. Over the past 50 years and more, China has been committed to promoting world peace, contributing to global economic growth, safeguarding the international order, and providing public goods. However, as the ghost of a Cold War mentality, hegemony and protectionism are still haunting us. New threats and challenges are increasing daily. All of us are aware the old doctrines of might is right, a rule of jungle, are coming back strongly. As the world has entered the new phase of turbulence and reform, the global governance, once again, is at crossroads. Against this background, my President, Mr. Xi Jinping, put forward a global governance initiative at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit this month. It includes 5 key elements, namely sovereign equality, international rule of law, multilateralism, people-centered approach, and action-oriented. I would elaborate a little bit more in the panel discussion number 1. This initiative has offered encouragement and the Chinese wisdom to international community. And we believe other countries may have encouragement from that initiative in their own efforts to safeguard multilateralism and world peace and to promote economic development. At the new historical starting point, China continues to uphold multilateralism, safeguard international system with United Nations at its center, and international order based on international laws, promote democratic international relations, and also trying to bridge differences with dialogue and settle disputes through negotiations. We continue to promote strong, green, and a healthy world development. China is ready to work with all other countries to further promote the development and also to improve the world governance so that we can build together a community with a shared future for mankind. Please rest assured, China will work with the rest of the world, all other countries, for the better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. And now it's my privilege to call on Her Excellency Winnie Banyamida, Executive Director of UNAIDS.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Excellency Presidents, distinguished guests here, brothers and sisters from the United Nations. It is an honor to join this opening ceremony of the NGIC high-level meeting. Thank you, Secretary General, for bringing us around this important theme of multilateralism on a crossroads, challenges and pathways to peace. This is a critical moment for the United Nations. Even before the current funding crunch, the United Nations needed a fundamental reset. People from across the world are losing faith in global cooperation, and it's easy to see why, and many have said it already. Amid war and flagrant human rights abuses, we are seeing a sudden withdrawal from global development cooperation, sudden, brutal aid cuts. This is at a time when the low-income countries of Africa are 2 out of 3 of them are spending more on servicing their debt than on the health care of their people. We are told that this is inevitable because we are in a time of scarcity. Yet, the richest 1% in the world have seen their wealth increase by $34 trillion in the last 10 years. Billionaires are only paying a tax rate of just 0.3%. Meanwhile, the incomes of ordinary people around the world have stagnated in the last 10 years. We are in an era of oligarchies. Wealth and political power are concentrated in the hands of a few. then the rules work for those few. Revolutionary medical breakthroughs remain out of reach of millions because the rules allow it to happen. They allow pharma monopolies to lock out the millions of people in low and middle income countries. 30 years ago, I was one of them. We all went to Beijing. There, in Beijing, at the historic Beijing World Conference on Women, we wrote down the rights of women and girls. Today, we are seeing a well-funded, globally coordinated backlash against gender equality aimed at rolling back the hard-won rights of women and girls. These and other global problems need global solutions. And if after 80 years, the United Nations is not delivering, it is indeed a time for a rethink and a refresh. And like my brother Tedros said, it's all we have, the United Nations. We must change it, we must reform it. But here is a success story I want to share with you, a success story of multilateralism that shows what's possible. The HIV response, which I lead on behalf of the United Nations, is that success story, and it shows us what works. It shows us that countries can come together to solve a complex global problem. At the height of the deaths from AIDS, almost 30 years ago, the world came together and resolved to fight together to end the disease. They created institutions. They created the joint program which I lead. They created the Global Fund and put resources there. And they worked together since then. And they created UNITAID. And since then, remarkable progress has been achieved. People living with HIV fought and won their place at the table of these institutions to lead the response for themselves. We broke monopolies and shaped markets to secure access to medicines for all, driving down prices by more than 99% in some cases. Today, if you live with HIV and you are living in Kiev or Ouagadougou or New York, you can have the same quality of treatment, but priced differently. We built solidarity between nations, North and South, and we put the world on a path where ending AIDS by 2030 was possible, even though the current funding crisis is putting this under threat. Today, 41 million people live with HIV around the world, but out of those, 32 million are on treatment and are able to live good lives. There is another 9 million to get on treatment. This is the kind of ambition we should have for UN reform. The United Nations was born in crisis, and it can be reborn in crisis too. Like my sister Rebecca just said, we have what it takes, and it is the work before us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, it's my great privilege to call on Her Excellency President Tarja Halonen, President of Finland, co-chair of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation, and Land Ambassador for the UN Convention on Combat Desertification. Madam President, the floor is yours.
I can manage all the time.
Doing well. Find that.
So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I dare to say, dear friends. So, this week, as we all have heard many times, we marked the 80 years of United Nations, and we have already heard first speeches in UN General Assembly. So the situation is sad and serious. The number of wars and conflicts are growing, geopolitical divisions are further deepening, and in this situation, it's easy to forget the achievements of the United Nations in these last 80 years. The UN has truly delivered for the people and the planet by promoting peace and security, development and human rights. I think quite correctly, the Madam Chair of General Assembly this year asked that what it would be without United Nations. So the United Nations remains indispensable, and the UN Charter, our compass for a better and sustainable world that rejects violence, inequality, and injustice. We have a chance, or we could have a chance, this week to rebuild trust and safeguard the progress made, and to make important decisions. How can the UN be reformed to the more effective and face the challenges that the world is facing today? It is clear that the current institutions do not reflect current reality. The majority of the world is not properly represented in the global institutions, including the United Nations Security Council. The UN must receive, again, a key role in conflict resolution and prevention, as well as peacekeeping, which needs also resources. Finally, let me also remind you that the year 2030 is only 5 years away. We need to intensify efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So I was co-chairing the Millennium Goals, and I remember how pessimistic people were. It went better than what we expected. And I have also co-chaired the Rio process. And it also started the implementation much better than what people thought. But I confess, I say very openly, now the speed of the progress has really slowed down and even lagging behind. So I think that we cannot only to see it, we have to do our utmost in order to get the better results. So it is a very worrying fact that the UN member states are so divided. For example, all UN member states subscribe to the rule of law as a core of the UN value. But around the world, the international law is being disregarded, and human rights are not being respected, and the rule-based international order is challenged. Accountability is needed, and the human suffering must be stopped in Sudan, in Palestine, and in Ukraine, and this list, sorry to say, could go on. The UN Secretary's UN 80 initiative is very much needed, but as a former lawyer, I could say only that the implementation is what makes the difference in the world. This is our future, and we all are also responsible. So we need everyone to act and contribute. Only by working together we can solve some of the greatest issues of our time, and these challenges are multiplied, from conflicts to warming climate and the gender equality to digitalization. But even I said already this morning that so many of us, the ladies, we are dressed in black and white, but I hope that we don't see the world in the same way, because here I hope we have the feeling of cooperation, and we will have also hope for the future, because we are those, we all together, we make the future, and I will encourage all of us that We will do, and as it said in the General Assembly, we never give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. And now it's my great privilege to call on Ms. Kerry Kennedy, President of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights.
Thank you. Thank you, my friends. Thank you, Excellencies. This year's NGIC conference takes place during a time of unprecedented upheaval when authoritarianism is on the rise. Heightened geopolitical tensions and fragmentation are driving state-based armed conflicts. Escalating rivalries between major powers, particularly the US and China, are disrupting global trade, investment, and supply chains. Debt burdens are growing, worsening already fragile economies. This issue is compounded by declining international aid and the disproportionate effects of climate change on vulnerable countries. Transnational criminal organizations threaten security and prosperity through drug trafficking, human trafficking, cyber operations, and money laundering. Rising inequality is fueling social unrest, political polarization, and the erosion of democratic norms across the globe. And conflicts, climate change, and economic hardship have led to massive increases in the number of refugees and displaced people. This strains resources, heightens tensions in host countries, and creates humanitarian crises. And then, on top of that, we heard the President of the United States at the General Assembly yesterday abandon multilateralism, criticize the United Nations, and conduct himself in a way that does not reflect the values of the United Nations or the United States of America. In short, our world is on fire. And when the building is on fire, it is time to call in the firefighters. When others are fleeing the building, running for their lives, the firefighters have one thing in common, and that thing is courage. Courage starts with bravery, the willingness to overcome fear in order to achieve a goal. But courage requires that goal must be to serve something larger than ourselves, than our narrow self-interest. It must serve the community, the country, the world. And courage requires a loving heart. When I look around this room, courage is the common denominator. Courage allowed Vaira to survive the Stalin and the Nazis, and then being sent to be a refugee in Morocco, and finally to return to her beloved Latvia and lead it into successfully joining the European Union. Courage allowed Zlatko to refuse to be airlifted out of Bosnia in the midst of war, to save his legs unless all other wounded citizens would be allowed to have the same treatment. Courage allowed Boris Tadic, as the head of state of Serbia, to hand over Slobodan Milosevic to the War Crimes Tribunal in the former Yugoslavia, to visit the Srebrenica Memorial, and to apologize for the brutality of war. And courage allowed Eka Chachishvili, as Deputy Prime Minister of Georgia, to attack corruption and famously fire every police officer in the entire country on one day, transforming that country. I could literally go around this entire room and point to stories of an extraordinary courage by each and every person here. That is what holds us together at NGIC, and that is the one vital quality for those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this has been quite an opening session, and I think we have already heard many of the themes that will be developed in the coming activities and panels over the coming 2 days. If I may just add a few words, I think this 34th high-level meeting of the NGIC takes place, as we said, at a moment of deep symbolic resonance. The world marks the 80th anniversary of the UN, which was born not just from the ruins of war, but it was born as a bold defiance against despair and violence. And its charter carried the daring hope that law, dignity, and solidarity would shape a more just and peaceful world. 8 decades later, that vision stands at a precipice. Peace is fractured by new wars, autocracy advances, and young generations inherit disillusion rather than progress. The milestone then calls not for ceremony, but for commitment and the renewal of trust in multilateralism and the courage to reform and update our international institutions to cope with the turbulent present and help humanity towards a better future. The challenges are great. The international order today is visibly fragmenting. We see not only wars in Ukraine and the horrors in Gaza, but also many wars that are not in the media. Sudan, Congo, Myanmar, Haiti, all of these places are going on, and the UN is trying to maintain peace, but with great difficulty. And many other places must remind us that a hierarchy of suffering dictated by politics or media attention undermines the very universality of the concept of human rights. And so, my friends, we are also witnessing other things. Challenges from the international order today are not just through wars and politics, but we're talking about a global pandemic. We're talking about climate emergencies. We're talking about transformations in demography, technology, and economics. And social media has redefined truth for many, while global supply chains have exposed vulnerabilities and inequality has widened. And the paralysis of the Security Council and the erosion of human rights norms and selective empathy for suffering reveals a fraying moral fabric. The institution of multilateralism still stand, but their foundations are weakened when political will falters. And so, my friends, we have few successful examples of building peace and ending wars. And perhaps a recent major step towards finalizing a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia after 3 decades of conflict is a source of both gratification and encouragement, calling for emulation by the many warring factions in the many conflicts that ravage so many parts of the world. May I just add a particular note about moral issues, in the sense that I want to remind many of the people in the North that many of the wars in the global South are fought among the poorest people in the world. And you know what? Not one of these countries produces rifles and ammunitions and machine guns. And yet, somehow people can finance that to bring it to those countries, but they can't finance the food that is required and the humanitarian aid that is needed or the health care that their people are entitled to. And so, my friend, as we face up to these many situations, the crises that unfold amid new forms of confrontation, not confined to ideology or territory, pandemics, climate stability, cyber warfare, the fierce race for artificial intelligence, biotechnology, now define new sources of global insecurity, and institutions that were designed in the 1940s are not up to the challenges of the 2030s. And therefore, we must rethink some of these things, but remain not only committed to global governance, accountability, and inclusivity, but also responsive to the universal values of dignity, equality, and human rights. And thus, the twin occasions of the UN's 80th anniversary and NGIC's 34th meeting converge in a shared message. The United Nations, for all its flaws, remains the only table where humanity can sit together. If we forsake it, we forsake our shared future. NGIC, by convening dialogue in this moment of peril, reminds us that multilateralism must not be allowed to fade. It must be defended, revitalized, and reimagined. The task before us is immense, but the choice is clear: to rededicate ourselves to solidarity in a fractured age, or to descend into the tyranny of might and the collapse of common destiny. So let this anniversary then be not an elegy, but a resolve to rebuild trust, renew courage, and dare once more to shape a better world. For in the end, the question is not whether the world order will change, it already is changing. The real question is whether we will shape that change together or be overwhelmed by it. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I declare this opening session has now come to a close, and I pass the microphone on to my colleague, Zlatko Lagumdzija, for the next session. Zlatko, the floor is yours. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.